What is going on, Hot Take Nation? It is David Ramsden-Wood here for another episode of the Hot Take of the Day podcast. I am excited today to be joined by Jerry McHugh, who I have known for, RMIE lunches, and we've gone sort of interacting back and forth for the last number of years, right, Jerry? How are you today?
Doing pretty well, thanks, David. Thanks for having me on your show. Appreciate it.
No, I'm glad to do it. We're going to talk today about something we don't talk a lot about, which is not only natural gas, but natural gas in the San Juan Basin. And I want to talk about your company, your experience, what it's like to be a private guy in the last really 10 years of energy, the Texas power crisis, and everything going on. So before we get going, for those who don't know you, why don't you talk a little bit about you and San Juan Resources and how you got to where you are today with the asset?
Well, I've been in the business for over 40 years. My father was in the business, and he would get me jobs in the oil field, which I really loved, from the Alaska North Slope to pulling weeds in New Mexico to being on frac crews and DJ Basin growing up. And so as I took a job out of college with the Dugan Production, 1980. So there's a little bit of a boomlet going on there, infill drilling. Mesa Verde and Dakota wells had been downsized from 320 to 160s. So I just learned things from the ground up. I was able to see how Tom Dugan and some of the independents down there worked. And then about 4 years later, went to work for my dad's outfit in Farmington. He needed a Farmington office, so I helped him open it. And then moved up to Denver here by 1989. We'd had enough of each other, so I ended up leaving him and starting San Juan Resources. And that's a parent-child relationship we don't really talk about, and I don't want to really go Dr. Phil on you here, but it was a good thing all around for me. One of the hardest decisions I made, leaving the family like that, but it was necessary and best for me in the long run overall.
So how did you get your start when you were the company and you decided, I want to be in Farmington, I want to build this asset base, I want to buy wells. So if we're going back 30 years, we're talking like 1990-ish time frame that you were starting. So
Right.
deregulation of the natural gas market. We had been in decline as a country in oil for a long time, but pre-resource, everything. So walk me through that time period, 1990. How'd you get your start? How'd you buy the wells? How'd you think about valuation and everything?
I just was paying attention to the BLM lease sales. There were some leases which came up around about the time I quit. It was going for $8 an acre in there, and no one was paying attention. At that time the Iraq War had just sort of started, so I bought some leases, and I had some partners working with me that did okay, but it was a very, very slow start, I'll tell you that. And quite frankly, I didn't have a plan B from leaving a family business, but anyway, it worked out. And about a year later, the company had 3 wells that they had operated for some people down there, the Dakota wells, and they were in 320s. And I took over operations because a lot of the gas was locked up in these U accounts. They're called unauthorized gas accounts at El Paso Natural Gas. And I knew some people down there, so I could confidently say, well, I can find you your gas, and we'll go from there. So I still operate those 3 wells. One we're going to plug next week or next month. And we developed in that area. Fast forward to 2003, 2001, when things really kicked off. We drilled an additional 20 wells in that area. It's around Aztec, New Mexico. It's not anything gangbusters, but we have a critical mass down there. And then we picked up some Fruitland wells too in the shallower zones from another company. So we're struggling along with those. That's kind of our little core area there.
So if you were to do a look back on that acquisition, I mean, it's one of the things, and it's going to be a topic we're going to talk about a lot, but private money, your money, versus a public company. And then all the stages of the oil and gas business going back to the 90s. I mean, we've seen growth, we've seen shrink to grow, we've seen grow to debt recovery. We've seen all the models, but you've had to live with your decisions and these wells you bought in 93. If you were to do a look back on the purchase price, the cash flow, and the return, good investment or bad investment, do you think?
Oh, it was a great investment. The wells didn't cost me anything. One of the partners had gone bankrupt, and I bought his interest for pennies on the dollar. I mean, I had to kind of wait for the trustee of the bankruptcy court to. I mean, it's really more of a patience thing. So, no, they didn't cost me a whole lot. The drilling, by the way, you drilled Dakota Mesa Verdes early on, and they were like $500,000. Farmington San Juan Basin had 40 plus rigs running. It was so hard to get equipment. Finally, some of the drilling companies got smart and raised their rates from like 5,000 a day to 8,000, then to 12,000. You know, and people are like, yeah, I had no leverage, obviously, but we drilled some okay wells and some ones that weren't so okay. There's a lot of mechanical problems with some of them, so some of them didn't turn out so well. But those are the ones that I, not being an engineer, being a land guy, and being a kind of generalist, I relied on in other words, I didn't ask the right questions to the guys operating the wells or contract drilling the wells in Farmington. So I think that would probably be something I would have redone.
So if you think about that, because you're bootstrapping a start and you're going to drill your first well, it's $500,000. You're in the land expertise. I assume you didn't have a big, huge, robust team because you're investing your own money and you're having to rely on consultants and you're learning as you went. How did you fund that first 500,000 foray, and what was that like?
Well, I had bought some stray interest wells from the family. I bought them. I wasn't giving them, and they were cash flowing pretty well. So about a third of the funding was from those. Another third was from some partners that I'd known who joined with me, and the other third was from the bank, because we had to pay our bills right away. And gas at that time was moving from the $3 to $5 to the $6, $8 range, and so cash flow would come on. Wells, and I make the statement that high prices cover a multitude of sins, and obviously we had some sins there, but that was kind of the formula: third bank, and we would pay the bank off in no time.
Yeah. Well, what would you do differently as you said, you were learning as you go, and you only learn through experience. I've made a ton of mistakes over my career. I try not to make them again. But when you think about you forming the team to go drill the wells, what do you think you could have done differently that might have resulted in less mechanical failures, less cost overruns, a little bit better operation? And as you said, your commodity price was working with you. And so right. It's going up. So the services aren't available. You don't have a lot of leverage. So it is hard to get the best crews and the best this and the best that. But in hindsight, is there any differences you would have made in the 90s drilling those?
Yeah, I think the engineering, asking our team out of Farmington the right questions, better questions. I would have tried to get more funding too. I had kind of bootstrapped. I mean, I've been thinking about this now because I'm trying to raise money to drill our 25,000 acre Mancos thing, which is kind of in line with what DJR Enduring and EOG is doing out there. And I think maybe one of the reasons I haven't raised a lot of money is I'm probably not a very good partner. Or I'm really picky on who my partners are, I should say. And maybe I'm just not a very good guy to look for. So that's the first thing I say if I get somebody close. It's really important to have good partners, because I've been in situations where the partners haven't been that great.
Well, I also think, Jerry, and it's a related point, but when you bring in external capital, I think a lot of founders, we think about the stories, right? We think about the Zuckerbergs and the Gates and the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks, and they bring in this money and then they have this personality and they control the company. But when you bring in external money, you give up control. And so, yes, as it's turned out, these guys have had huge options, and Elon has built a bonus plan that made him the world's richest man as a result of what happened in 2020. But like when you bring in capital, they own you, and you go from working for yourself to working for someone else. And I think a lot of people forget that, and especially back in the heyday of private equity, where an engineer, a geologist, and a landman would get together and be like, well, we have this idea of this play, and I can't believe private equity's given us such a bad deal because like we're the ones who are doing it. And you're like, well, without the money, you're actually just a guy with an idea.
Yeah.
And an idea is a dime a dozen. Actually getting the capital is a real skill. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh yeah. And I haven't really been attracted to private equity situation. I mean, my situations are in the early 2000s was really, I was a general and everyone else was limited. And I had no problems. They didn't want to be involved. They didn't want their name on anything. And so I think that's one of the reasons that staying away from private has been my thing. And quite frankly, on that 25,000 acre project, we've sold it 3 times. We sold it to independents who they ended up not drilling on. We got it back. We sold it to a public company. They drilled around it. 3 months later, sold the whole thing. They wanted to go to the Permian. Said, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And then we sold it again like a year and a half ago. The company actually drilled on the property, but they botched it. But that was a really kind of a good arrangement at the time because they were somebody I had known. The landman and the group I really liked, but they just didn't execute in San Juan on the well. So
we'll come back to the San Juan and where we are today. I want to jump back to 1993 because when I think about the setup, and I'm a cynic, I'm a bear, I'm a skeptic. One of the things I am most concerned about is I remember I was in I think I was grade 7 or 8. I'd have to check the age for sure when the Iraq War started. And I remember the first missile being fired. I remember my dad was in the oil and gas industry, and I remember being excited because oil prices like massively jumped. But I remember that time of massive upheaval in the Middle East because there was a scarcity. And the scarcity was the US had been declining in oil. Our energy consumption was growing. We weren't sure this natural gas thing really until Aubrey. We didn't really have a great solution for it. And it led to wars. And so when I think about 2020 and deglobalization of the supply chain, and so now countries are going to be stuck with the resources they have, whether it's food, water, wind, natural resources. Once you have scarcity, and we've seen this week, China's been talking about reducing the exports of rare earth minerals again, and they're looking at it because we obviously rely on so many. And if we go back to this very nationalistic hoarding view in the world, while it might have some benefits, the geopolitical upheaval of the 90s really resonates with me. Do you remember that time? And what do you think about the reason, like the way things have evolved in the last 30 years around geopolitics and the opening of economies and then COVID?
Well, my reference at that point was the 70s. Growing up with a dad in the oil and gas business, and he didn't talk about it a whole lot, but he mentioned the federalization of oil. That was a big talk. If you like the postal service, you'll love nationalized oil. It's kind of the thing. And so that was my template to going into the 90s. And I remember driving back from having bought a lease for like $100 an acre. I was like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And it was in, that's when they're doing the KGS 5 years on, and you could hear the bombs going in Iraq. And, oh man, my timing must be really great, which it really wasn't, because we were this was a little bit of an oil play, but we were in a gas basin. And as you know, gas from 1990 to 2001 was in the $1.50 range, and then it kicked up to $2.75 about the time that I bought some of those stray assets and put some of those other wells together. So it was just coming back. Yeah, looking now, I think obviously the world has really changed with up to 13 million barrels a day. down to 11, I'm thinking, down to under 11 probably. I think, the gas, especially the way we can export gas. I mean, we used to, El Paso was a big, they had it hooked up from the wellhead to the California border. And my dad used to, I love the story. He used to talk about how, yeah, I'd call up Bill Parrish at the El Paso gas office and says, yeah, Jerry, that well's going to be hooked up in about 20 days. And, just like clockwork, the well was hooked up and producing, and, you had like 27 prices in some of those times. So obviously the world has really changed from then to now. We have abundant supplies in the US. Energy is, I still think the demand is going to be strong. Everyone's saying this is the end of oil, the end of hydrocarbons, and we've been here before. I've been here before.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And this is the historical context to it. They say history doesn't repeat, but it sure rhymes. And the OPEC cartel crisis in the 70s, the power crisis really in World War II, and not knowing where the oil was going to come from, the Iraq War in the early 90s, the Senate hearings in where we're going to jump back to San Juan and the company story, sort of 2001, 2002, you've been grinding it out in a basin. You got an oil play, it's a gas basin, you have some wells, you're learning, you're growing, and the Senate hearings are talking about the shortage of natural gas. And,
right.
And this guy out of Oklahoma, charismatic, I'm going to call him a promoter because, I think that everyone who raises money knows that you have to be a promoter. The
right.
more realistic you are, the less likely it is you're going to raise money. And that's a real balance, because then it puts private equity people and money people on edge, because every time you tell them something, they divide by 2 and subtract 30%. But nonetheless, Aubrey came in and really pushed for abundant natural gas to create a market for it, and fought against coal plant construction, because he knew if you build a coal plant for 40 years, that power is going to be coming from coal. But if you build natural gas, you're creating your own supply. And what could be better than creating a demand for a product that you happen to own a tremendous amount of? Talk to me about the early 2000s, pre-Barnett, pre-horizontal shale, pre the crush, but 2001 to 2005 for you in the San Juan Basin, and what you were experiencing as a company.
Well, it was all about the commodity being so strong and having changed. It wasn't so much what the number was. It was the fact that it was, over $3, going up to $4. Some wells that I had I was a non-op interest in, and they'd send out like an AFE to drill an infill Fruitland well. And you're like, you don't even have to ask anybody if you want to drill that thing, because it was Williams that was doing that. Conoco was doing wells out there too that were, in coal bed methane. So they were kind of jumping onto those coal bed wells in infill areas. So there really wasn't a whole lot to think about, other than in some ways a little bit of a euphoria.
And so all this is going around, and you're seeing I can only, because again, you're private, you're seeing your personal net worth and your personal net assets and your company, you're growing, you're having success, revenue's growing, you're drilling prospects, presumably you're buying things, you're seeing big publics, you're seeing private equity. There's a lot of interest in there. Was there ever a time in that time period where you had the opportunity to sell or wanted to buy someone else? And walk me through the mindset at that time in the big upcycle, and looking back on it now, knowing our industry as you do for the last 40 years, thoughts or advice or anything, and we'll tie it back to 2020 and where companies are at.
Well, for me, I think what I thought I did best was to get to those hard to find leases that no one wanted to fiddle with. So I would get a landman down in New Mexico to just ferret out, and it was right in this area, because Burlington had a deep project in this area. So there was some previous lease has been taken out. They kind of let it go. I mean, that's what they were doing. They were looking for deep oil in the Pennsylvania, around Farmington and Aztec, New Mexico. My goodness. And so I was really more in an acquisition place. I do remember back in 2011, about that time, things were really, really hot. I had lunch with someone at Samson, and they said, well, they were buying gas reserves for whatever you had per day. They were going to pay you like $11 for that MCF. That's kind of like that was their formula. And I'm going, man, that's really good. I don't think I should sell though, because I don't know what I'd buy. B, what do I got to do that? I was really more in acquisition mode versus and I think looking back on that, you'd probably say, well, maybe that wasn't the smartest thing. You got to really be looking at value. How are you going to preserve value? How are you going to go with those sorts of things? So, I did what I did. I always say, I don't have much, but it's all mine. So, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the wells we do have and the problems we have too. So
right. I mean, and so this is the interesting thing, and I say this, the private equity, in a way, private equity is actually super efficient, and I'm just going to use private equity as a placeholder. It is high cost of capital, but it's very nimble, and it identifies opportunities, and whether it's Zoom or selling toilet paper in 2020 or building masks or SPACs or pick your thing, they're very good at deploying money in a really quick way. And the way they make their return is you have to sell. And so what I find very interesting, you can say there's three business models in oil and gas. There's your company, which you've had for 40 years, certainly 30 years, that's private, your money, your decisions. You have to run it a certain way. Then there's the big public company, which no one there started really. I mean, Harold Hamm is an exception, but broadly speaking, people work up in the organization, they run this, but they think about it as a career. So they're going ups and downs in the commodity cycle. Exxon, I think, is absolutely classic around, we have a 5-year plan, we can't modify for 2020. And then they massively modified for 2020. And then in the middle, you have private equity who knows that you have to sell at the right time and buy at the right price to be able to capture the cycles, but it adds complexity to the competitive. How do you think about our business model as it is today, what's coming forward, and how private and public and private equity may collaborate or compete in the next 5 years of our industry? And what would you recommend to people in each of those elements?
Well, I only know what I read and what I hear from other people. I know in the private equity, there seems to be some consolidation of companies. Okay, I want this company over here to be in my shop, and okay, let's get you guys and kick these guys out. And I mean, we know some people who are really doing well in that. I mean, I think that's happening. I really think it opens the door for private equity companies, because the big guys are just going to sit on their hands. And they've already telegraphed that they're going to do that. They're going to go into solar. They're going to go into this. They're going to go to Russia. They're going to go to Azerbaijan. Whatever. I mean, BP is classic. Oh, we're green all the way, but they've got 2/3 of Rosneft in the Arctic. I mean, give me a break. So, anyways, I just think there's real opportunity for smaller guys to pick up the slack, especially in the U.S.
What about the future of the San Juan Basin? So you have a 25,000 acre Mancos prospect. And I remember when I first moved to the US in 2006, 2007, one of the assets we were focused on, it was a big part of the Kerr-McGee Anadarko acquisition, was Greater Natural Buttes, which had the Mesa Verde, obviously like the big gas play, but there was always talk about the deep Mancos and deep Mancos in the Piceance Basin and what deep oil prospects. And we never, and even in Utah, we never really saw it develop. But the San Juan Basin, as you said, an age-old basin, been there forever, tons of wells. What's the key, do you think, to bringing this Mancos back, and how do you think through the prospect when you're selling it?
Well, so I have two of them. I have a 25,000 acre Mancos oil and gas, and then I have a dry gas up in Carson Forest, about 6,000 acres. So I think the challenges in the San Juan is how do you turn that into a top tier basin? How can we do that? I mean right now there's 0 rigs running. DGR is getting ready to complete some ducts that they've drilled last half year or more ago. I don't know what Enduring's doing, but it's turned into essentially a private equity basin.
Yeah.
Lagos is down there. I think, and actually the big purchase is ICAV, a European renewable, having bought out the BP assets. 616 million a day of 4,000 operated and 4,000 non-operated wells. That's pretty big chunk. So interesting story too. I'll be talking to the CEO next month on that, on our San Juan IQ. No, I think just get the right partners, get the costs in such a way that you can move the gas out cheaply. There's infrastructure. Everywhere we are, there's infrastructure. We could take 1 million a day out of there right now of gas, right in this 25,000 acre thing. And then there's a capacity to take about probably 70, 80 million a day out of a northern gas area where there's a big trunk line going right through the area. So the real key on that though is and I talked to this ICAV CEO about it earlier in the week. He really thinks that what the San Juan needs to do to differentiate itself from the Fayetteville and these other kind of similar basins that the San Juan can rise above is that he believes that companies, stakeholders, contractors, midstream need to work a lot better together. I mean, case in point, I remember signing a contract at my dad's company. I inherited some of those old contracts with Williams. It's now Harvest Midstream, owned by Hillcorp. But those contracts with the colas have gone up. They're a keep whole contract. They've gone up to over 55 cents.
Yeah.
Call them up and, hey, can we try to work things out? You're too much of a peon to do this. So that's really where things really need to start to change. That's an example, for instance.
Well, I mean, and honestly, let's look at Energy Transfer this week announced a huge acquisition on the midstream side. You had Noble, who had spun out their midstream because, again, and not to be cynical and skeptical of bankers, but when you're getting 10 or 12 times some multiple and an energy company is trading at 5 or 6, and you can put a huge amount of debt on this crazy multiple, it paid management teams to spin out their midstream, even though it lost control, divided stakeholders, split money to fees and management teams and incentive units and everything. And now we're seeing Chevron buying back Noble. I expect that at some point you'll see Oxy do something with Western Gas, which was the legacy and one of the first ones that Anadarko spun out. You would say what you will about Al Walker, but he was a very creative CFO become CEO, and he knew where the dollars were, and spinning out Western Gas really kicked it out. So I agree, we need more integration, we need more collaboration, and we need to be able to generate returns. When you look at the San Juan and cost structure, does it work when now that gas is $3 an MCF? Does it work at that price, or is the sweet spot at a 350 or 4? Because when I think of Fayetteville, I think about $4 an MCF.
No, it starts to work even on that cost structure. It starts to work a little bit. What I think is what I think is interesting about that and the economics we've done at 270, you get your money back on the gas project in a year and a half, and you're cash flowing pretty quick here. You may have some higher capex initially, but it's really starting to look good. But like I said, I mean, what is interesting about the San Juan now? Enterprise tells me they have 300 a day extra capacity on their midstream to move gas in the main line to California. So we've gone from 4.5 BCF a day at 2000. Now we're down at about 2.3 BCF a day in 2021. So much of that the growth has happened then. Transwestern was built up there to take it down to the main line to California or to Texas. El Paso always had re-looped and they have two 34, 36-inch lines to California. From, once it gets to Gallup, it gets big. And I think, what we're seeing, and had a real good talk with on gas market earlier in the week. There's just no growth in gas in the key areas which would essentially compete with San Juan. San Juan, there's no growth.
Yeah.
Piceance, there's no growth. Permian, there's no growth. Mid-Con, there's no growth. It's all just going to be no huge gas coming on. So it's really setting things up for a little bit tighter market and higher commodity prices.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that that's a really excellent point when you think about the business model of midstream has always been about growth. The business model of E&P has always been about growth. You're going to grow your way out of debt. You're going to build more, because especially in the utilities, they're just able to charge back whatever capital they spend. And so when you depreciate and don't spend capital, even though it might be better for the producers, it's worse for the company because their earnings are dropping. But we built all this infrastructure, all this excess infrastructure, so much capital went to growth because it's so easy to get. And now we've turned it around where really the gas market would be much more constrained if we weren't exporting natural gas. We're up to 11 BCF a day. The oil market would be much more constrained because we're exporting 3 million barrels a day. So it was this growth. And now we're in this consolidation, shrink, manage, cost. And it's going to be very interesting. I want to pivot the conversation a little bit because you triggered something for me. As new companies pitch me on, I want to do a big PDP acquisition. I want to buy, arbitrarily 600 million a day, 4,000 well bores. The thing that concerns me the most is orphan wells and stripper wells. And the reason I say that is because, no company is reserving 50,000, 20,000, 80,000 per well.
The P&A, exactly.
And so I come in as the buyer of 600 million a day. There's a lot of good cash flow. And if I run a realistic P&A model to get that surface reclaimed, to abandon the well properly, to account for environmental issues, to surface and scrap everything at surface and get rid of the scrap, which there's really no value for because there's so much. There's a huge capital outlay, which is never going to be paid for by the company because they're not actually reserving the capital. And I think the PDP model falls on its face because of that. You said you're P&Aing a well next week. How do you think about P&A liability, and this as a problem in industry? And is there something that you would do about it, given the experience in a lot of basins where there's a lot of abandoned orphan wells? Well,
if you can, companies like to kick the can down the road. And so you'll get a proof test or turn it on, do whatever you can to get things going so that the state is satisfied and the BLM, if it happens to be on federal, is satisfied as well. No, I don't think about it a lot. I mean, I worked for Tom Dugan. He was like, you'd ask Tom, hey, how you doing, Jared? How things going on? He says, I'm plugging along. He goes, don't ever say that. Don't ever say you're plugging along, because we don't plug a thing. Well, since Tom has passed, they plugged a lot of wells that do the production, and I know that they've shored up their situation there just only because they had so many and they had to. Now that's a tricky one. Of the wells we have, and in the state of New Mexico, you're allowed 2 or 3% to be shut in and T&A kind of things that they don't want. In other words, they don't want companies having to use. So there's a governor on, literally a governor on you that's keeping you in line. But we try to turn them on, or if we have to fix them, we'll fix them too. In fact, our field people this past week, with all this gas coming on and $90 for a couple weekends, going, hey, why don't you fix these wells over here? Let's repair the tubing here, okay? So we've been doing some of that. Some of those shut-in wells, and then that'll give you a whole year, and that would have paid out in a month.
The commodity business is a very interesting business, and it overlays that everything is about timing. If you buy at the right price and timing works on your side and prices go up, you do very well. And if you buy it at the wrong time and the purchase price is wrong, it almost doesn't matter what you do. It's very, very difficult to come out. Now, one of the things I've really appreciated from you in the last, I want to say it's been about 6 months, it might have been shorter, but you've been doing a sort of a webinar series called the San Juan IQ series. And so I describe it a bit of brand building where you've been out there talking about it. Talk to me about how that's gone and what the response has been and how you recommend to other people who may have less of a social media presence or brand. Do you think it's important, first of all, and what's been your experience with having built this this webinar series?
Well, it's I got the idea because I had given some talks to Doug or something like that on increasing your San Juan IQ, and I rebranded it to say improving our, because I learn more than anybody on these things, quite frankly. And so is a twofold reason: one, to be relevant, remain relevant, and I mean, people know me. People think I was raised in Farmington, but I was raised in Denver. I've lived there. My oldest son was born in Farmington back in the previous life. But no, and secondly, I'm really interested in getting to know new people, getting to know what's going on. I want to know what's going on. So when I talk to Matt Marshall at Aegis about their hedging and focusing on the San Juan Basin for a whole 45 minutes, I gained a lot of that. I must say I'm more of an introvert, and I am an introvert, and so it's a struggle for me to get out there to, but I keep moving along, and like I said, we've had some good talks with people, and we're trying to do some stretch, get some things set up. We have a little promo video each month. We try to get the guy or gal to talk about what the theme is. So it's just a way to remain relevant and to maintain in touch. And I think people have appreciated it. I've gotten a lot of kudos from it. The VP from Hillcorp, in fact, he just got on it yesterday to check out the gas outlook from earlier this week. So
I think it's really an underappreciated art form, and I talk to a lot of podcasters, obviously, and it's more. I like your word. It's about staying relevant, but it's a forum for people to engage, and especially in 2020, on the back of this work from home, you're not necessarily meeting people outside your social circle. It is hard to have these conversations, and so I really do commend you for making a choice and saying, hey, this is going to be the platform by which I'm going to meet people and learn things. And we always said it at One Energy, you got to kiss a lot of frogs. And we looked at hundreds of deals, and the way the Permian deal came in was like a random phone call with some people looking at a lease sale that needed a partner, and that really kicked off everything that ultimately became One Energy, and we timed it very well because of a little bit of luck, but it was also good rock. And it worked out. So I appreciate as well. And with the hot take of the day, as you can imagine, I get to meet a lot of people. I meet a lot of people, and I really enjoy it. And it allows continued dialogue and continued growth, both for me and I hope for everyone else.
Well, and we get 50, 60 that join on the, and it's live. It's live and it's taped, and I probably ought to figure out a way to put it on a podcast, because when we do have exhibits and things like that, that makes it obviously a little bit different. It's just not a hard interview. But it's been good, and I mean, I'd like to figure out how to grow it more. I mean, for somebody like me, it's really key to how do I find those next partners? How do I find the next people who want to come and join with me? Because I think we've got some interesting things to sell. I don't know anybody else who's got 25,000 acres are trying to peddle, or say 31,000 acres are trying to peddle in the San Juan Basin. And I'm looking for a partner to take to the next level, or someone to take me out totally. So there's and another thing you mentioned on the new world here, we talked about before the podcast. I have a loft in downtown Lodo. And so I've come here just every day. I early on in the COVID, I was at home and it's like that. But no, I've really enjoyed it. It's a private place, and I'll reach out to people and we'll bring some food up and eat it at the dining room table here. And it's very, very nice and very, very, very fun just to be able to, but you're right. You got to make the effort.
Yeah.
You have to make more effort these days in some ways, but different kind of effort too.
Well, I love that. So last question for you, and I ask this of a lot of our guests, and we've touched on some of it, but if you could go back to a younger Jerry and pick any of the times, pick when you left the family business, pick some of the jobs you had early on, pick the first operations you did, but what advice would you give yourself that may have accelerated what you now know? You now have learned something that's been massively impactful for your career. What advice would you wish that you could have told yourself that would have made a positive impact on the speed at which you got to where you are today?
I'd say, I'd say pay attention to the financial and try to get better in financial acumen and just work more on understanding that and not being able to hold on to things so long. I mean, we divested some things in 2012 to 13, 14 to 15, 16 when things were pretty hot, and I mean, which were good moves. Yeah, I mean, I think early on, maybe in the 2000s, I mean, the engineering financial was not my strong suit. It's finding those really hard to get leases that were my strong suit.
Right.
And putting together really hard projects with lots of regulatory crapola. That was my strong suit. That has been and still is.
And I think that, I mean, again, we all play to our strengths, and you being a landman could differentiate from other companies by taking that stuff on. And I think that your point is very well taken, and that you need a team because not everyone can do all that stuff. And you need to know your value, be able to bring value to the table in all the disciplines, and then execute. So, well, Jerry, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I enjoy talking about basins that aren't really understood, and more to the point about having built a company yourself with your own money. And been there for 30 years, and you eat what you kill, and there's something to be said about that, and so I commend you for that.
Thank you.
And a successful career. So
thanks for having me. I enjoy every week, sometimes twice, 3 times a week, what you have on there. I wish I could channel you, David, to do my interviews, because I don't always think on my feet as well as you do. But you really ask some really good questions. And when I'm in the car going to the mountains or walking my dogs, I'll listen to you, and that's really helpful. And I've learned a lot too. I really learned a lot. The Rossano and this last interview with Pickering was just amazing. So I thank you. I've really enjoyed what you put out there too. It's quite a great medium to learn about it. So.
Well, I sure appreciate it. And for all the listeners, I thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed to us either on YouTube, if you happen to be a member of that, or wherever you listen to your podcast, subscribe, write a review. Those are the things that help them elevate in the rankings. Not that I care about the rankings, but in order for us to get our message about our industry out to a larger crowd, so it's not just an echo chamber, those things help. And I will continue at the hot take of the day, doing deep dives into topics that we might not always think about, but that are important to talk about. So until next time, be safe, be good, have a great day, and bye for now.